This is the August 2019 Regents exam. Okay, they've only given this test 3 times because they did change the Regents exam not that long ago. Okay, so most of these questions you've seen before, but it couldn't hurt to look at them again. There will be some new ones for sure. Okay, so if you were to take a look at 1 and 2 here, and you'll see this throughout. This is nothing new. Every time I've given you guys a test this year, you have questions that pertain to sources. And usually you get like 2 or 3. It's always at least 2. 2 or 3 questions per source. And a lot of the times, one of the questions or 2 of the questions can be answered by just looking at the source. Other times, in like the next question or so, you will have to make some kind of connection. Like maybe it'll ask you what led to this document, or what was an effect of something that took place in this document, or who else was doing similar things in history at the same time. Okay, so this first question here, and again, the test also goes chronologically. Okay, so you will see that early in the test, you're looking at places around the year 1750. And if you go back in time, earlier in the school year, way earlier, like the first and second week, we looked at like the world in 1750 is like a unit of study. And we looked at some of the empires that existed, right? So if you were to take a look at this map here, you see India on this map, you see Arabia on this map. Okay, so if I were to ask you guys, like, okay, which empire existed in India around 1750, it would be the Mughal Empire, Mughal. Okay, the empire that existed where my mouse cursor is here, that was the Ottoman Empire. Okay, and both of those places did things very similarly. They both attempted to centralize authority, meaning one powerful central government would exert control over a large area. And usually if, authority is centralized, right, everyone's working together, there is no civil war going on, right, it could lead to some prosperity. Okay, so we saw in both places too that there was a large degree of religious tolerance practiced in both areas, right, because you guys should remember, in India, as well as this area that I'm highlighting here, the Middle East, there is a tremendous amount of diversity that goes there, whether culturally or religiously. I know there's some overlap there, right? Hindus and Muslims in India, Muslims, Christians, and Jews in the Middle East, right? So if it's Akbar the Great in India, or if it's Suleiman the Magnificent in the Ottoman Empire, one of the things that they have in common is they use religious tolerance to try to maintain social order. Okay, otherwise, how are you going to keep this multinational empire together? It's not so easy sometimes, right? We see a lot of times in history that multinational empires often fall apart, okay, because each group within it insists on having autonomy or sovereignty or self-determination, whatever you want to call it. Okay, so we have here questions 1 and 2 pertain to this map, and it's referring to European trading stations and possessions. Okay, so you guys tell me, if I'm referring to an area of the world that's the possession of another, what's that buzzword we've been using all year where one part of the world is taking over another? Imperialism, exactly. Okay, so this is imperialism going on around 1750. Okay, so like earlier imperialism. So we see that you should always look at your map keys, right? Before you even look at the questions, try to gain an understanding of what we see here. Right, each of these patterns, if you will, represent an area on the map controlled by Europeans, right? So if I'm looking at this portion of Africa right here, it says Angola. Those lines that are running horizontally, that's Portuguese territory. This dark gray area here, this is Dutch territory, okay? And the individual dots are ports, okay, controlled by specific European countries, okay? FR meaning France, BR Britain, PORT period for Portugal. Okay, so let's look at some of these questions and try to see what we have here. Okay, so what you always want to do is apply every answer choice to the map and see if the map contains that answer. Okay, see if you can use the map to prove one of those statements to be true. So the question here says, what is a valid conclusion based on the information shown on this map? Okay, so again, take every answer choice, plug it into the map, almost like you're doing a math problem, and see if it makes sense. Okay, so take a look here. Russia had the largest number of trading stations in Asia. Well, that can't be true, right? Because these are the different regions that are controlled by others. Okay, I don't see Russia really controlling anything on this map. Okay, so I cannot prove that Russia had a large number of trading stations in Asia when none of these little patterns represent Russian territories. Okay, it's not in the picture. It's not going to be the answer. Take a look at choice 3. France controlled more ports in India than Britain did. Okay, so we have to go to the map and look at the ports and see which ones belong to France and which ones belong to India. To Britain. Okay, so my mouse pointer is hovering over India. Okay, I see a BR, that's 1 BR, 2 BR, 3 BR, 4 BR. That's 4 British ports, and I see only 1 French port. Okay, I guess you could consider Chanderagnore. I probably didn't pronounce that correctly. Maybe that's a French port in India as well. Okay, so I see 2 French ports and 1, 2, 3, 4 British ports. So I can't support the claim that France had more ports because we see straight up that India had more ports Britain had more ports than France did in India. Okay, so this choice 3 is the exact opposite. Number 4 here says each European power represented had possessions in the East Indies. Okay, well, I have to now find the East Indies on the map, which is this area right here to the right-hand side. This is modern-day Southeast Asia. Okay, and the only territory I see around here is Dutch territory. So I can't say that each European power had land here. It's only one European power that had land here. Okay, so through a process of elimination, we're down to choice 2. Most European trading stations and empires were located along the coast. Right? That's what they all have in common. Whether it's the ports, whether it's the patterns, right? The dark gray, the horizontal lines, they all seem to be on the edges of these places. Okay, so that makes total sense that you want to be on the coast, right? You're going to take advantage of trade networks. Okay, so just apply every answer choice to the map and see if they make sense. Okay, which Europeans controlled the waterways connecting the Indian Ocean to the Pacific Ocean? Okay, this is helpful because, again, normally you won't get 2 questions that you can use the source to answer straight up. Sometimes they make you recall something, again, like a cause and effect or a comparison. But again, I can use the map to answer choice 2. Apply every answer choice to the map. So the waterways connecting the Indian Ocean, which is here, to the Pacific Ocean, that would be like somewhere in the middle, right? And the only power that I see in the middle, really, are the Dutch, right? Looks like they're the ones that are firmly in control of the waterways. Okay, so we're going to go with choice 3, the Dutch, for that particular one. Okay, so that should make sense to you. Let's move on to the third question here. Okay, and I won't waste your time with reading all these. What I'll do is we'll look at the questions and we'll talk about the content, and I'll point out some parts of the document that would help us answer the question. Okay, so we have here, always look at who wrote the document and when it was written. That should, in theory, help us figure out something about the source. So it says, Simón Bolivar, reply of a South American to a gentleman of this island, 1815. Okay, so if you remember anything about Bolivar, before you look at the source, it should definitely help you. Okay, so Simón Bolivar was this South American Creole, right? Somebody who was born to European parents, had a lot of wealth, okay, but never really had political power. He basically had to follow the will of Spain, and the guy wanted independence. Okay, like all people in the Americas, they're all influenced by similar ideas. Okay, like the Enlightenment ideas, right? John Locke says you're all entitled to life, liberty, and property. Okay, so if you don't get those things, if your government denies you those things, you have the right to overthrow that government. So Simón Bolivar is taking that advice. Okay, so if you were to look at this source, I'm just going to highlight a couple of things that stood out to me when I read it. Expel the Spaniards, meaning get rid of the Spanish people from South America, okay, so that they could be independent. Union, okay, he wants to bring people together for a common purpose, much like other nationalist leaders like Gandhi or Otto von Bismarck, right? Through unity, we have strength. And if we have a common goal of independence, if we work together, we can achieve that goal. Okay, he wants a strong country under the guidance of a liberal nation, which will lend us her protection. Kind of fancy wording there, but when he says he wants a liberal nation, in this context, liberal means guaranteeing freedom. Okay, it's not like the American notion of liberal, which means like, the Democratic Party. In this case, it's just referring to freedom. So he wants to be protected by a government that protects freedoms. Okay, and he wants his country to have great prosperity. Okay, and he wants the arts and sciences from the East. Okay, so like Europe, which have enlightened Europe, he wants those to come to a free Columbia. Okay, Colombia was a term that was thrown around for a little bit of like a united South America. Okay, think of it as like the United States of South America. Okay, so Colombia today is just a small country in South America, but Bolivar had this grand vision of a united continent, right? And if all the people work together, and if Bolivar can, cultivate common interests among the people, in theory, that would be a stronger place. Okay, but that never worked out. But in this letter, Simon Bolivar's goal is to choice 3 here: form one nation that unifies all of South America. How do I know that? He says it in the source. Okay, there is no evidence of any other answer choice here. Okay, usually, again, guys, when you get a document on the Regents, the first question can be answered directly from the source. Okay, you don't have to think about outside information here. Become monarch of the strongest country in South America? No, the guy doesn't want to be a monarch, right? He's influenced by Enlightenment ideas. He doesn't want monarchy. He wants democracy. Break off diplomatic relations with Europe? There's no evidence of that. Okay, because he wants Enlightenment ideas to come from Europe to South America. Okay, if I'm breaking off relations with Europe, then how is that cultural diffusion going to happen? Okay, so he does not want to break off diplomatic relations. And there's nothing here, if you were to read the source, you would see it for yourself. There's nothing here about Mexico, or rather him trying to convince Mexico to join in his fight against the Spanish. Okay, so again, maybe read it on your own for, I don't think I mentioned it before. This is the August 2019 Regents exam. So you can go ahead and pull this up if you want on your own and read these documents. Okay, but the only answer choice where you could find evidence for it directly in the source is choice 3. He literally says, right, he wants to unify the people of South America. So Simón Bolívar's actions were most likely the results of or influenced by the work of whom? Okay, so again, he's mentioning liberal nation. He's mentioning enlightened Europe. He's mentioning independence from Spain. We know that all those things come from Enlightenment thinkers. Okay, so he's directly referring to people like John Locke in this source. Okay, Marxism is communism. Okay, and that happens later in history. This is still earlier on. He's not referring to anything in the source about, poor factory workers overthrowing the rich. He's not referring to laissez-faire, right? Laissez-faire means the government does not get involved in the economy. And he's not referring to anything about Catholicism, nothing about religion here. But he's talking about Enlightenment ideas, okay? Freedom, enlightenment, arts and sciences, independence. So next, you've seen this before, okay? Always look at what the source is and when it was published. Okay, so this is a political cartoon going back to 1866. It says Death's Dispensary. Okay, a dispensary is where you would normally go to get medicine. Okay, so it looks like this dispensary is not handing out medicine. I've got these skulls handing out water to the people. Okay, so it's kind of like, I don't know, it seems like they're poking fun out of something. Like instead of handing out medicine, they're poking fun at the situation that's occurring in England. Okay, how do I know it's England? It's in the other source here. Okay, so it says in the source here, drinking water was drawn from the same rivers into which raw sewage flowed. That's not great. Okay, it does say literally the words England here. It says Parliament, House of Commons. Okay, House of Commons is like the British version of House of Representatives, right? So part of their legislative body. And you guys should remember that Parliament is, right, the legislative body of Britain. Okay, so we've got the time period. It's the 1860s. It's right smack dab in the middle of the Industrial Revolution. Okay, and we know that with industrialization, we have a lot of problems with regards to overpopulation and pollution. Okay, so many people moved to the cities so quickly that city governments did not have ample time to develop like sewer systems. Okay, it wouldn't be until like the actions of reformers brought the horrible conditions to the attention of Parliament that things would actually get done. Number 5 here is a very easy question. This illustration and excerpt depict events from which time and place in history? It's Victorian England. Okay, as it says England straight up. That's how I know that. Victorian England, the word Victoria just refers to, in this case, the time period in which Victoria ruled as the absolute, sorry, I shouldn't say absolute, as the monarchy of England. Okay, it was a constitutional monarchy, not to get too confusing, right? They have a parliament to make sure the king or queen doesn't abuse power. Okay, it doesn't say France in the source. We know that the cholera outbreak is not associated with France. That's a British thing. It's not Meiji. It's not Russia. Okay, all the clues are right here. It's mentioning England. So number 5 should be probably the easiest question on the entire Regents. Okay, number 6. Which characteristic of the Industrial Revolution was most directly contributed to the health concern highlighted in this illustration and excerpt? Okay, so I just want to point your attention to this phrasing here, most directly contributed. It's asking for a cause, but like caused first. Okay, so what contributed to the health concern, meaning what caused the health concern, right? Trade union movement happens after the fact. Okay, but what caused the health concerns? Urban population growth, right? Urban meaning cities. The growth of cities happens really quickly, and then conditions get really, really bad. Okay, so the thing that most directly caused what is happening in the documents is urban population growth. Sorry to sound confusing on that one. It's been a long year. It's been a long day. All right. Number 7, which action effectively addressed the specific public health concern? Like, what did they do to fix this problem of cholera and people dying from the water supply? Should make sense that we're going to improve water treatment. Okay, clean up the water, and then we won't have death as a result of the water. Makes sense to me. All right, let's move on to number 8. Okay, the partition of Africa, imperialism in Africa to 1914. If you guys look at this map here, you should be able to tell me. This should be very easy. We've gone over it a lot of times this year. What's the historical event that is tied directly to Africa being partitioned in this way? Okay, it's the Berlin Conference, where they sat down at a table in Germany, and to oversimplify it, they basically issued rules for how each European country could take over parts of Africa. So it begins this process of the Europeans seizing control of all these sections. Okay, so the question ties directly to that event. What was a result of the political situation shown on this map? Okay, again, it's not asking you a question about the map itself. It's like, what was the result of the map? Like, what happened once the European countries did all this stuff? And it's going to be choice 4 here. I know you've seen this question before. The boundaries that were established led to the division of traditional cultures and commerce. Okay? The Europeans didn't take into account the natural boundaries of the African peoples that were already there. So when you redraw the boundaries, sometimes you're going to put people together that don't necessarily like each other, right? So extend this, guys, to like common, the current situation in Africa. Like, what's a problem that we see in a lot of these parts of Africa that stems from the Berlin Conference, and it stems from these boundaries? Okay, civil war happens a lot, right? Anglo-Egyptian Sudan, when the Anglo means England. Okay, when England leaves, there are 2 groups here, Christians and Muslims, who don't like each other. What happens? Civil war. And they split apart. You'll have a Sudan in the north, and then a South Sudan. And there's a part of Western Sudan who's trying to break free called Darfur, and there's a human rights violation going on there. So conflict is the result, whether it's Africa or the Middle East as a result of the creation of mandates, but we'll get to that a little bit later. Number 9, you can answer this question based on the map. It'll take you a long time to look at the entire continent, so this could be something that you just know off the top of your head. Which African state organized the most successful resistance movement to the European actions shown on this map? Okay, the answer is Ethiopia. I know that from our studies, right? And that's right here on the right-hand side, right? The guy who was in charge of Ethiopia was this guy Menelik II. He was fighting against the Italians. The Italians wanted to come and take over Ethiopia, so he purchased weapons, I believe, from, I want to say, France. So he was effectively able to modernize his country's military to fight off the Italians. Okay, so that's kind of the backstory, the historical circumstances, if you will, that would explain why Ethiopia was able to remain independent. Okay, but even if you didn't know that, there were only 2 places on this map that don't have one of these patterns in the map key. Liberia, okay, which was like an American colony that was later given independence, and then Ethiopia. Okay, so 2 places on that map. If you took long enough, you could probably figure that out. But I would recommend just having some of these things in the back of your head. Okay, so that's 8 and 9. 10 and 11 are very, very simple. You guys have seen these very recently in your CASA learning assignments. Okay, so some clues that will help you make sense of this passage. Okay, I will highlight a couple of them. Attack, so we've got conflict. They leave their trenches going over the top, 1918. Okay, so number 10, probably the second most easy question on the Regents exam, right? You guys tell me, which conflict refers to trenches and 1918? World War One, Jack's World War One, exactly. Okay, going over the top means you're climbing over the hole and charging across the field towards the machine guns on the other side, right? An act that you guys should remember could very well lead to death or serious injury. Okay, so number 10 should be very, very simple. Okay, so it's talking about bombs and guns and, you've got, I thought I saw, masked with fear. I think probably referring to gas masks there. Okay, so which claim about modern warfare is best supported by this poem? Look at choice 1 here. There's no evidence of this, right? Soldiers were not as brave as in the past. Well, first of all, the source doesn't directly say that soldiers were not as brave. But I would also argue that if soldiers are going over the top of their trenches and charging towards machine guns, I don't know. If you ask me, that means those soldiers are probably the most brave soldiers, I don't know, of all time, charging right at a machine gun, right? Facing a tank head on. All right, so I don't think we can prove choice 1 to be true using this source. Religion became more central to long-standing conflicts. There's nothing about religion in this document. Again, if you were to read it, you would see that. Scientific research did not supply battle-ready innovations. I don't know. If you ask me, tanks and bombs and guns, that is absolutely scientific research. Okay, so I don't think we can choose that particular one. The only one that makes sense is choice 2. Technology made combat more deadly. Okay, tanks, trenches, that's going to lead to more casualties. Okay, so let's move to number 12. All right, we've got a source here. We've got 1930. We've got Bombay. Sunday. Bombay is a city in India. All right, and let's highlight a couple of things that stuck out to me, right? So we've got Mahatma Gandhi. We've got Indian nationalist leader here. We've got efforts to obtain complete independence of India from British rule here. Okay, broke the salt monopoly laws and so inaugurated the campaign of mass civil disobedience. So civil disobedience is a way of doing nonviolent protest, right? So if you guys remember, in a couple decades before this, the Indians did rise up against the British. It was called the Sepoy Mutiny, and it got crushed, right? So Gandhi knew that there's not going to be any way that he can lead an effective military campaign against the British. Okay, so what he's going to have to do is organize the people into nonviolent resistance, right? So it's just simply break laws and kind of make the British look like a bunch of big bullies, right? So one of the laws that was taking place was the Indians had to purchase salt from the British at a very high price. It was like a salt monopoly law. So Gandhi's just like, all right, we're going to walk to the ocean. We're going to grab some salt water and just evaporate the water and boom, we'll have salt. Okay, so think about that, right? So Gandhi is going to be arrested by that. And the world's going to be like, did you really arrest Gandhi for making salt? That's kind of absurd, right? So he effectively turned the world against the British, which would later contribute to Britain getting out of India. Okay, so when he's just breaking laws, that's a method of non-violent resistance, peaceful protest, civil disobedience. They all mean the same thing. Other people in history that have done similar things could be like Martin Luther King Jr., or it could be Nelson Mandela to an extent in South Africa, who's trying to liberate South Africa from the control of the Boers, right? That apartheid stuff. All right, which statement best summarizes the effects actions like those expressed in this excerpt had on India? It's going to be choice 4. British control of India gradually weakened and ended. Okay, look at the other answer choices. Okay, we can learn a lot from the other answer choices by trying to prove why they are wrong. International support for British colonial rule in India grew. That's the exact opposite, right? The whole world's not going to say, hey, Britain, you're right. Yeah, you should definitely arrest Gandhi, right? He's being a jerk. No, the world's like, Britain, you're the jerk. You're arresting Gandhi for making salt. That's absurd. Okay, so number 1 is the opposite. The call for Indian self-government was abandoned. No, right? The Indian people don't give up their independence movement as a result of this. If anything, they're encouraged, right? They see this Gandhi guy like leading a charge to stick it to the British, right? That's going to inspire the call for self-government, not weaken it. Separatist movements in India ended the fear of oppression. I don't see anything about that in the source. Okay, a separatist movement again is trying to break free of the British Empire. I don't see anything about fearing oppression in this source. Okay, so the only answer that really makes sense here is choice 4. All right, let's move on. Mandates. Okay, a hard word, and I've seen it on the Regents a lot in the last few years. It seems to be like something that they always want to ask kids about. So if I was a betting man, I would expect to see some questions about mandates tomorrow. Okay, so if you guys don't remember, mandates were like these territories owned by the British and the French after World War One, right? The Ottoman Empire was in the Middle East. When World War One is over and the Ottomans lose, the British and the French divide up a lot of that territory between them, with the exception of what you'd call Turkey today. The Turkish people were able to hold on to that for themselves, and they began their process of modernization under Kemal Ataturk. But the rest of the territory got carved up, right? You'll get the countries of Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Iran, Syria, and this area called Palestine would be controlled by the British for 28 years. Okay, so keep that in mind. That's the context, the geographic, I guess you could say, context for why the British own this is because they carved up the Middle East into mandates. Okay, so the questions, I think these are a little bit tricky. What would be the best use for this pair of maps? Okay, so we have to understand what's being shown on this map here, right? The dark gray area represents Jewish settlements. And then that's 1920 to 1948. And this is ultimately what they decided to do as far as partitioning the land, right? If you guys remember, there was that long, and I mean long-term conflict between Jews and Muslims over who should own this land. It's important to all three of the monotheistic religions, right? Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. So after the Holocaust, a whole bunch of Jews start moving back here, right? They claim that that's their ancient homeland. They were there first. They should own it. And if they were the majority group in any given area, they would no longer be subjected to persecution. Okay, so you see that here on the left, that Jewish settlements are developing. And then on the left, you should see there's a correlation here, right? Areas where you see Jewish people on the left, right, the dark gray, like take a look at this coast here, right, near Tel Aviv. If you look at the map next to it, you see the slanty lines, which represent Jewish state. Right, so it looks like the United Nations decided, generally speaking, wherever Jewish people existed, we're going to call that Israel, and wherever the Arabs live, okay, we will call that an Arab state, okay, or the state of Palestine, if you will. Right, so there's definitely a correlation between where Jewish people lived on the left and ultimately what Israel would become on the right. So what's the best use? Okay, there's direct evidence in these maps to support choice 3 here, to understand a reason used to establish boundaries for partition. Okay, what's the reason? Jewish people lived on the left, so we're going to make that area a Jewish country here on the right. Okay, if you were to look at the other answer choices, there is no evidence for those other answer choices in these maps. Okay, I can't learn based on maps why European powers used the mandate system. Okay, it's not giving me like written history there. Okay, the only thing I could see here is that, again, wherever Jewish people are on the left, that would become Israel on the right. Okay, that's in my opinion, a very, very difficult question. Number 15, which situation was a contributing factor in the decision to partition Palestine? Okay, so again, a question that relates to the history shown in these maps, but you cannot answer the question just based on the maps. Okay, so what's a contributing factor? Another way of saying what's a reason for the partition? The reason is Jews entering the region more and more after the Holocaust, okay? And the world community saying, okay, we feel a lot of sympathy for Jewish people now, understandably so, right? They were just subjected to the Holocaust, so we need to give them their own state, okay? So hence we have the creation of Israel. Okay, so an excerpt from a speech given by Nehru at the Bandung Conference in 1955. Okay, so I'm trying to put myself in your shoes right now. You probably don't remember or know anything about this Nehru guy. But in case you're wondering, Nehru is going to be, that's his last name. He was the first leader of India after Gandhi's death, okay, and after India became India and Pakistan. And he's speaking in 1955. And what he's saying here, if all the world were to be divided up between these two big blocks, what would be the result? The inevitable result would be the war. Okay, so you have to now like put this into context, you have to think about the time period and what blocs might mean, right? 1955 is the Cold War. Two big blocs, sounds to me like two big groups, right? So you have the Western Europeans and America, right, as like the NATO bloc, and then you have the Warsaw Pact on the other side, okay? So he's saying here that that's not a great thing, that since the world is divided up into two sides, what you're going to have is war eventually, right? It's just creating this climate of tension. So which historical development led this guy to promote the policy of non-aligned areas, right? To be aligned with somebody means you're on their side. And this guy is basically in the source saying that non-alignment is what we need to do. Non-alignment will keep peace. Okay, so the expansion of NATO and the Warsaw Pact is what's leading this guy to say, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to pursue a neutrality policy or unaligned policy. Okay? And there's a reason for doing that, right? So think about the context again of the time. India has only been independent for 8 years, right? They suffered a long, long time period in which they were subjected to British imperialism. So they're in no position to join a military alliance, right? Because if war broke out, they would be committed to fighting in that conflict, right? They're worried about themselves right now. They are rebuilding, right? They are a newly independent Asian nation that's in no position to take a side, okay? Because they want to pursue peace. They want to focus on building their own society and not run the risk of getting caught up in a war. Right, so if you're looking at number 17, right, newly independent Asian and African nations, you might call those places like third world country, or a synonym for that could be developing country. Okay, and those developing countries did not want to be part of NATO or the Warsaw Pact. Okay, Afghanistan was another one, and it was kind of controversial when the Soviet Union rolled in and forced them to be communist because Afghanistan wanted to be part of the non-alignment movement. They didn't want to take a side, but they were forced to, right? And we know that invasion of Afghanistan caused a lot of problems for the Soviet Union later on, and the United States, right, because of our participation in that conflict indirectly. Let's move on to 18, 19, and 20. All related to a picture. Pictures are fun, right? Less words. Mao's cult of personality also went also went beyond the badges and the little red book. They were propaganda posters inside homes, classrooms, meeting halls, office buildings, and factories. The line beneath Mao's image says, "Wishing Chairman Mao a long life." Okay, so a propaganda poster is designed to make you believe something about your leader. Okay, the cult of personality idea here is basically you're trying to cultivate, that's how I like to think of it anyway, cultivate this idea that your leader is like a godlike figure who could do no wrong. And propaganda posters play a role in developing that cult of personality, right? You're making them look larger than life, right? Doing great things for the people, right? You don't see any of the bad things that the leader did, right? You guys should definitely remember for the Regents that Mao Zedong and Joseph Stalin, even though they look like they're great people in these propaganda posters, right? Some of their policies led to massive famine and therefore millions of deaths. All right, so which political leader other than Mao utilized this type of poster? So you have to ask yourself, okay, who do we know in history that used propaganda posters? Hopefully you guys can recall Stalin, right? Mao Zedong is basically the Chinese version of Joseph Stalin, who was the leader of the Soviet Union in the decades before World War II and a little bit afterwards as well. Okay, a communist leader, also did 5-year plans, also purged everyone who was out to get him. Okay, the design and use of this poster suggests its purpose was to. Okay, so think of this almost like as a CRQ question. What is the author's purpose for creating this document? Or in this case, this particular painting. The reason for creating a propaganda poster is to build support for the leader, right? Make the leader look really good, and therefore the people will support that leader. There's nothing here to suggest that he's advertising for healthcare. He's not warning people about capitalism, and he's not looking to improve literacy in this particular poster. Okay, it's making him look like almost like he is the sun, right? He shines on all the people. He's super powerful. Number 20, which historical development is most closely associated with this poster? So a historical time period or event in which you would see these posters, and that's the Cultural Revolution. Okay, we spent a lot of time on this. We did if you guys want to go back and look at your Cultural Revolution lesson, where we looked at some primary sources. Okay, that's a time period where Mao was like looking to get rid of people who were critical of him because his Great Leap Forward led to a lot of death. People start to speak out, and he doesn't want that. So he gets all these kids and teenagers basically brainwashed in Chinese schools into believing that he is amazing, right? And it's the fault of like the opposition that China is failing. So teachers, doctors, lawyers are all rounded up and either arrested or executed, right? So we're getting the opposition off the streets, and we're going to pump people full of propaganda to kind of pump up the image of Mao Zedong. That all happens during the Cultural Revolution. All right, the Qing dynasty, that was long gone. That was the last of the old school Chinese governments. Nothing in here about opium, nothing in here about special economic zones, which is associated with Deng Xiaoping, right? Those are the zones where he allowed foreign businesses to operate in China. Okay, Cultural Revolution goes with Mao Zedong. Ataturk's fashion police. Okay, Ataturk is the guy who created an independent Turkey, really out of the ashes of the crumbling Ottoman Empire. He was a leader of this group called the Young Turks, who were kind of resistant to the Ottomans, right? They thought that their Ottoman Empire's government was weakening, right, and allowed Europeans to kind of rip it apart. So they wanted to kind of salvage what was left and make a strong country out of the remnants of the Ottomans, and that would become modern-day Turkey. And like other places we've learned about this year, this Ataturk guy wanted to westernize and modernize Turkey. So what does that mean? He wants to, if I'm saying westernize, he wants to copy Western culture, right? So basically, whatever Western Europe and the United States is doing culturally, they want to do that in Turkey. Okay, so that might refer to, let's say, the laws of the country, the religions of the country, the clothing of the country. And they also want to bring in up-to-date technology. That's what modernization means. Okay, so fashion police means he's kind of going after like traditional dress. Okay, he issues clothing regulations to keep religious symbolism out of the civil service. Okay, the civil service is the government, right? We have a civil service system here in America. That's basically how I got my job, how to take tests in order to work for the state of New York. Okay, so traditionally, people who worked in the government for the Ottoman Empire were like directly connected to Islam and wore like religious clothing. Right? Think of like a priest wearing his priest outfit, but also being in the White House. So Ataturk is trying to get rid of that stuff. Okay, so he issues reforms, right? Sweeping series of reforms. Reforms means changes, okay, that altered every aspect of Turkish life. He's changing the alphabet. He's changing the education system. He's changing the civil code, which means law. Okay, and he mentions this thing here, the fez. The fez is like a traditional Turkish hat that was worn for a long time. Now was made illegal. Okay, the fez was banished now from Turkish society. And those who continued to wear the fez received prison sentences, hard labor, and even a few hangings. Right? So imagine that. Imagine your government giving you the death penalty for choosing to wear a particular style of clothing. That is intense. Right? So while we often think of this Ataturk guy as this great reformer who did great things, I don't know, to me it's kind of a blatant violation of the freedom of speech, if you ask me. So the goal or the purpose of the reforms here is to modernize Turkey in the image of European nations, copy what Europeans are doing. Okay, he's not looking to revive the Ottoman Empire, because the Ottoman Empire, again, is the empire where they used religion in the laws, where they wore the traditional dress. He's not reviving that, he's getting away from that. Okay, he's not looking to implement a law system based on religion, right? He's reforming the laws to take religion out of it, right? Get religious symbolism out of the civil service. Okay, so he's also not preventing the elimination of the civil service system, because it says it's still here. He just wants religion out of it, but he doesn't say he wants to get rid of the civil service system. That would be bad, right? Civil service system, in theory, ensures that you have smart people taking government jobs. Right? I couldn't be your teacher unless I did well on 3 very tough state exams. Okay? In theory, I know what I'm talking about. Okay, so number 22. The phrase is deeply conservative population. Okay, a conservative population, right? Usually, it depends on the context, but most of the time when I say the word conservative, I'm kind of referring to traditional, right? So not really on board with a lot of changes, right? Maybe likes things to be status quo. Right, so the fact that we're referring to a conservative population who resists change, prison sentences, and hangings, well, they suggest a few things, right? It does not suggest that the reforms are eagerly embraced throughout Turkey. Okay, eagerly embraced throughout Turkey means everyone's on board. But we see here that people are willing to be killed to defend their traditions. So what do we see here? That tensions existed between reformers and traditionalists. This is an enduring issue, the tension between the modern and the traditional. You see it play out in every place all across history. I'm sure you can think of some examples of how it's playing out in America right now. I won't bore you with that for the sake of time, but it is absolutely an enduring issue. Let's move to 23 and 24. Okay, you've seen these recently. The cost of Soviet involvement in Afghanistan. So let's talk about the backstory. Okay, so first of all, Gorbachev is the guy who was in charge of the Soviet Union at the time. Okay, he's known for some good things, right? He brought in Glasnost, which is allowing people to have freedom of speech in Russia. He brought in Perestroika, which is basically elements of capitalism would be allowed in the Soviet Union, so you can open up your own business and make a profit. In theory, that would make people produce more things and benefit other people. Okay, so he, though, is still part of the Communist Party. He still leads a communist nation. And that, we talked about the long-term goal of communists is to spread communism, right? While the US and NATO countries are looking to contain it. Okay, so the Soviet Union invades Afghanistan in an attempt to promote and spread communism in the Middle East. Okay, and the United States gets in the way. So does the United Nations. And we arm rebel groups that are fighting the Soviet Union, right? This is an example of a proxy war, right? So we don't fight the Soviet Union directly, but we support people who are fighting against them, right? So you guys remember maybe the Mujahideen, right? Those religious warriors who, because communism is an atheistic philosophy, Muslims were not happy with it, right? So the United States saw an opportunity here to not be involved directly, but they supported the Mujahideen with weapons and training. And over 10 years, yes, we were able to help them kick the Soviet Union out of Afghanistan, okay, which is a victory in one sense, but in another sense, it kind of militarized or gave weapons to, some pretty hardcore groups in that part of the world, one of which would become the Taliban, take over Afghanistan, and then fund Al-Qaeda, which was responsible for 9/11. Okay, so maybe we didn't see that as a potential side effect back then, but it did happen. Okay, so I'm getting a little bit off track here. So back to the question. The situation described in this passage was part of which historical development? Okay, this is part of regional conflicts during the Cold War. Okay, so yes, the Cold War implies that there are no direct conflicts, but you do have these little battles, okay, that took place all around the world that were supported by each side in different regions, right? So the region of Southeast Asia had the Vietnam War. The region of East Asia had the Korean War. The Middle Eastern region of the world had the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. Okay. 24. Which major political event was partially caused by the Soviet war in Afghanistan? So you can't really answer this one based on the source. You have to know what an effect was. Okay. We can imply, though, or rather we can infer is the better word, that this did damage to the Soviet Union. Okay. So if it did damage to the Soviet Union, I wouldn't say that choice one's a good one. The Soviet occupation of Hungary, that suggests a powerful Soviet Union capable of doing things. But this source is saying that the war is not going well, right? Building the Berlin Wall suggests, again, a powerful Soviet Union. This source does not support that. It suggests a Soviet Union that's not able to achieve its goals. Placement of nuclear missiles in Cuba, again, suggests a country that's still growing, that's still very influential. What happens? The collapse of the Soviet Union, right? This event, this 10-year attempt to spread communism weakened the Soviet Union, and a weakened country will eventually collapse. Cool. Okay, so this is a really difficult section from this Regents. We did this in class recently. I gave this to you guys if you're my students on a CASA learning assignment. Okay, but since a lot of you guys maybe didn't see that, it's important for us to kind of talk about it. Okay, so it's talking about China being this powerhouse of low-cost manufacturing, meaning China can produce a lot of goods very, very cheaply, right? Which we could attribute to low cost of labor, maybe not much in terms of minimum wage, maybe not much in terms of environmental regulations. Okay, so it's talking about China like rising as this economic power, and it's also referring to NAFTA. Okay, NAFTA is a regional trading bloc. Now that's very confusing. It's a group of countries that have a common goal. You got to know two. You have to know NAFTA, which now has a slightly different acronym, but that doesn't matter. It's the same concept. NAFTA and the European Union, which is obviously in Europe. So what do? Those regional trading blocs dismantle, meaning get rid of barriers to trade. So what's a barrier to trade? Taxes are barriers to trade, and blocking the freedom of movement of people is a barrier to trade. Okay, so in theory, when you reduce these barriers to trade, that carries both positive and negative effects. right? It does lead to lower prices for products, but it does lead to the outsourcing of jobs, right? Why would I want to manufacture something in America where I have to pay people a lot when I could just manufacture the product in another country and then ship it back over the border, right? Because I know that there can't be a tariff when the goods cross the border. That keeps the goods cheap, right? So jobs often move to less developed countries as a result of these regional trading blocks. Okay, so the source is referring to the fact that even though Mexico is right on the border of China, right? Mexico is right next door to America. China has replaced Mexico as the number 2 exporter to the U.S. Okay, so out of all the countries in the world, this is 2005. This might have changed, but surprisingly, Canada sells a lot of stuff to us, but China is rapidly catching up. I bet you if you were to look at the stats now, China is probably number 1 by now. And this surprises the person because Mexico is right on the border, right? So it's easy to ship goods over land, over a border. It's easier to do that than to put things on boats or planes and then ship them from China to the U.S., right? So he's kind of surprised that China is now taking over because you would think that those shipping costs would make those products way too expensive to be competitive. But no, they're still cheap enough that now even in Mexico, Chinese-made products are being sold in Mexico. Okay, so they're kind of undercutting even Mexican manufacturing. So this guy is surprised here that China has surpassed them because Mexico is right on the border of the U.S., which in theory should make things very, very cheap when it comes to trade. But no, right? It just goes to show you how cheap labor is in China, how cheap it is to manufacture things there as opposed to other countries. And then this number 26 here is very, very confusing. Okay, first we were afraid of the wolf, then we wanted to dance with the wolf, and now we want to be the wolf. Well, what's being referred to here? What's being referred to is a conversation that took place in which China was talking about America. Okay, so China was once afraid of the wolf, meaning America. Then he wanted to dance with the wolf, meaning have a relationship or trade with the wolf. And now China wants to be the wolf. Right? Think about the imagery of a wolf, right? Something very powerful, not just any old dog. Okay, so that helps us answer choice 1 here, right? An economic powerhouse. What does the wolf symbolize, right? It's a country that is number 1 when it comes to the economy. That's a very, very hard question because China is also going to be an exporting country here, right? But I would argue that the wolf imagery represents something very, very powerful, not just any old exporting country, because Mexico is also an exporting country. Canada is an exporting country, but a powerhouse country, like that's the wolf, right? A superpower, if you will. That was a very hard question. I remember when that came up on the Regents, kids had a hard time with that one. 27 and 28. Okay, remember guys, this is an old test. You get 28 multiple choice questions, then the CRQ section, and then an enduring issues essay. And we'll practice a little bit of, we'll do the CRQ stuff, and then we will do maybe write a couple of paragraphs of an enduring issues essay. Okay, so New York Times Upfront. I give you guys Upfront articles all the time. This is 2010. And industrial meat production is a key factor behind the deforestation of the Amazon and other tropical rainforests. They're being cleared to create fields to grow the feed needed for all those cows, especially corn and soy. Interesting. Okay, so deforestation means cutting down the forests. And we're clearing them because we need fields to grow food for people, right? To expand farmland. So this is directly connected to like maybe an expanding population of people, right? So we're changing the environment to suit our needs. And that's, it can be problematic because cutting down the rainforests, which are full of carbon absorbing trees, further worsens climate change by reducing the planet's ability to soak up the carbon. Which issue is closely associated with the concerns? The issue is climate change. Okay, we are changing the environment, and that is causing the climate to change. Okay, drought means no rainfall. That's not being referred to in the source. Okay, what's being referred to is changing the environment. And that's causing maybe the planet to, warm up, right? 28. This is hard. Okay, so again, it's not about the source itself. It's about what has happened as a result of the source. In which way have many countries joined together to address the problems described in this passage? And what we've done is cooperation. Okay, this is a common theme later in the course, is that some of our problems are too big for any one country to solve on their own. International terrorism, one country can't solve that. Environmental change, one country can't solve that, right? We talked about this in class, right? If tomorrow the United States bans cars, you would still have pollution in other parts of the world, right? The only way you can ease pollution and ease climate change is if countries agree to all do the same thing. So we've been signing as a world international environmental agreements to try to stop climate change. Okay, there are two in particular you might want to be familiar with. Both were in one of your recent homework assignments: the Paris Climate Agreement and the Kyoto Protocol. Paris is the most recent one, and that's the one being discussed in the news. And basically, the countries involved in it are all agreeing that, over the course of the next 30 years or so, give or take, we're going to reduce the amount of carbon emissions, the greenhouse gases, right? So we're going to force the cars to be more electric, force the cars to get better gas mileage so that we pollute less. Okay, but again, international cooperation is the key to solving these problems. At least that's how the United Nations feels about it. Okay, so the CRQ section, guys, like I said to you many times in class, there are two sets on the Regents. Every single time, the first question in a CRQ section refers to historical circumstances or geographic circumstances. Okay, so by this point, hopefully you guys know, especially for tomorrow morning, right? Historical circumstances is what led to this document being possible. Not why the author is writing it, what in history made the event a thing or made the event possible. So let's try to get a sense of what the event is. This is Robert Owen, not Olu's, Robert Owen. Observations on the effect of the manufacturing system. Interesting. Okay. So we've got a change has been owing chiefly to the mechanical inventions which introduced the cotton trade into this country and to the cultivation of the cotton tree in America. Okay, so talking about the change when it comes to mechanical inventions. So machines are being produced, and those machines caused an extraordinary demand for almost all of the manufacturers previously established, and of course for human labor. Okay, so this is a very confusing source, but the stuff that's in it is pretty simple to understand, right? When you use machines to produce things, prices come down, and when things are cheaper, people demand more of them. They want more and more clothing. Okay, so what happens? You get factories being built, you get more workers being hired to work for really long shifts, okay? Because you're trying to meet the demand. You know that there are sales out there, so you're going to force your workers to work as many hours as possible to produce clothing. Okay, so these are some of the effects of industrialization. The immediate effects of this manufacturing phenomenon were a rapid increase of the wealth, industry, population, and political influence of the British Empire. Okay, so the empire is getting wealthier. It's getting more factories, higher population, and more political power. Okay, meaning that the British are able to dominate over other governments in the world. Okay, and there were accompanying evils of a large magnitude, right? So bad things happened as a result of the Industrial Revolution. He doesn't go into them so much here, but he is acknowledging that not everything is perfect when it comes to the Industrial Revolution, and we know that. So here's the hard part. Explain the historical circumstances, right? I looked at the answer key for this, and the state of New York did accept the Industrial Revolution as historical circumstances. Okay, but be careful though, because in my opinion, this source is talking about the Industrial Revolution, not what led to the Industrial Revolution. Okay, so what led to it comes from outside the document. And one of the things, in my opinion, that led to it is the Agricultural Revolution. Okay, because the Agricultural Revolution took away the job opportunities for a lot of farmers who then moved to the factories to take those factory jobs. And since they were so desperate for work, they were willing to work for those low wages for long hours, right? If you didn't have that large group of people willing to work for those wages and for those amount of hours, maybe there is no Industrial Revolution. Maybe there is no powerful Great Britain. Okay, so one historical circumstance that led to the development occurring in Great Britain was the Agricultural Revolution. That's one thing you could say there, right? That's identification, though. You always want to explain as well, right? So an explanation for that could be the Agricultural Revolution led to a higher population of people who are willing to move to cities to take factory jobs. Okay, for the sake of time, I'm not going to be typing these things out. But remember, guys, it's not really enough to just identify the event that was before it. Try to make the connection, right? Make the connection between Agricultural Revolution and industrialization. Okay, you could also make a case that the British Overseas Empire led to the developments in this document, right? Because without the British getting access to cotton from America, they would not have the resources to produce all that clothing back in Britain. Document 2 is a point of view question. Okay, some of us are still confusing purpose and point of view. Point of view, guys, is how the author feels about something. Okay, so how, basically, let's rephrase the question, right? How did John Fielden feel about the factory system and how it impacted laborers, right? So he's probably going to think either that it's going to be either positive or negative. Maybe the positive is, right, the impact on laborers is what it was, that it gave them job opportunities. Or maybe the impact on laborers is that it caused them to suffer in the factories. So it's going to be one of those two, right? So we have to see which one is reflected in this particular source. And I can already kind of figure out what it's going to be, because he is dedicated to the cause of social reform. Okay, generally a social reformer is like looking out for the people and trying to persuade governments to do things to start benefiting people's lives. And so here we go. I can confirm my prediction, right? It says the curse of our factory system, right? If I'm using the word curse there, that implies it's not so great, is that it tends to exact more labor from the hands of workers than they were fitted by nature to perform. Meaning humans there's a limit to how much work a human can perform in a day. And here we are with these factories forcing people to work more than they're capable of working, right? Maybe they're getting hurt on the job or dying from overwork, right? That would imply that, yeah, they hit their limit for how much work they could possibly do. This down here, lower in the source, it says, overworking does not apply to children only. The adults are also overworked. Okay, so I would argue his point of view concerning the factory system was that it caused workers to suffer, okay, or that it caused workers to suffer hardships. Okay, so you want to state that broad claim, right? It caused workers to suffer, and then you want to say something along the lines of this can be inferred from a document when it states that workers are being overworked, that they are being asked to work more than they are fitted by nature to perform. Okay, back up your claim with some piece of evidence, right? He believes that the factory system harmed workers. Give me an example of workers being harmed in your second sentence. Okay, for a question about point of view, you want to support your claim with evidence from the source, right? Make it abundantly clear that you've read the document. Make it clear to the reader of your Regents exam tomorrow. Okay, 31, a cause and effect. Okay, so with these guys, you have to do two things. Okay, you have to identify that the first document led to the second one. Okay, well, I'll tell you again how to do that. And then you want to explain the connection. Okay, so I will type some stuff out on this one so you can kind of see clearly what I'm talking about here, right? Identify, I'll put it down on the bottom here. When we do the identification part, we don't want to just say document 1 led to document 2. We want to kind of basically summarize the main idea of document 1 and how that main idea influenced the main idea of document 2, right? So if I were to look at these documents, I would simply say the Industrial Revolution is the main idea from document 1, right? Like a 3-word summary. And I would say that the hardships of workers is the main idea of document 2. So I will simply start with that. I will say the Industrial Revolution led to hardships suffered by factory workers. Okay, this would get you 1 out of 2 points. Okay, in terms of the CRQ section. Now you have to explain the connection a little bit, right? This is not a natural occurrence. Something must have happened that made this take place, right? So I will say, let's see, lower prices. This is my explanation. Lower prices led to increased demand for products, which led to companies having workers take longer shifts. Okay? A brief explanation. Look, there's only 5 lines here. They don't want an essay, right? 2, 3, 4 sentences tops should be all you need. And if you look, there's evidence here from both documents because you need both, right? I paraphrase the evidence. Lower prices led to increased demand for products. That's exactly something seen in document 1. Okay? Excuse me. Right? Increased demand. I have it highlighted here. So that's evidence from document 1. And then I see here, which led to companies having workers take longer shifts. that's something seen in document 2. Okay, if you looked at the rest of the source here, this section that I did not highlight mentions the amount of working hours. Okay, they're talking about reducing the work week to somewhere in the 60s. Okay, which is still longer than the average work week. Right, but that longer shifts is evidence from document 2. Right, so it's just a brief explanation with just a little piece of evidence from each document, and you're good to go. Okay, you don't have to worry about writing a lot. Just make it short and sweet. Identify that one led to two, and then explain it. Okay, another thing you can use if you wanted to explain this was, I'll just put it here. You don't need another explanation, but I'll also say, during this time period, Britain practiced laissez-faire capitalism, which meant that the government took a minimal role in the economy. Okay, so since the government's not really getting involved, that's what enables the companies to hire their workers and work them for really long shifts, right? There's no maximum 8-hour workday. Does that make sense, guys? Just a short little explanation. Make sense? Okay, so document 1 here, you've seen this recently. Peep under the Iron Curtain. Okay, so let's take a look at here. We've got the year 1946, so it's the beginning of the Cold War. We've got Winston Churchill, who was the leader of Great Britain at the time. We've got Joseph Stalin, who was the leader of the Soviet Union at the time. It's cool that they labeled those people for you. That was generous of the state. And it even explains to you what geographic context means. Okay, it's discussing, basically talking about where a place is and why it's taking place in that area. So basically writing about what's happening on the land, and maybe using what's happening on the land to explain history. I know that sounds confusing, but it'll become more clear in a second. Usually when you guys get a geographic context question, in my experience, it relates to one of two places. You might get a map. I know this is a tangent, but this is important because it's possible you'll see this tomorrow. They might give you a map of Japan creating an empire across Asia. And they might ask you, okay, describe the geographic circumstances for this map. Okay, so you have to talk about how the land situation led to Japanese expansion, right? So you would simply state something along the lines of Japan needed natural resources to industrialize, so it took over other parts of the world in order to get those resources, right? Using the lack of resources, which is geography, to explain the history. Another time you might see that is if it's a question about Great Britain. Maybe they show you a map of the British island. And they say, and they give you like all the little cities, and they might ask you describe the geographic reasons for the growth of cities in England, right? So you might say something along the lines of, since England had an abundance of natural resources and navigable rivers, that encouraged the development of factories and cities, and people moved to those cities to seek out those factory jobs. Okay, so geographic context is you're writing about the land and what's happening on the land. Okay. So we've got Europe with this curtain being drawn across it, right across the train tracks. It's not a wall because it looks like it's being moved here by Churchill. And I see a curtain rod at the top, right? So this is the Iron Curtain. We see behind the curtain the Industrial Revolution, industrialization happening in the Soviet Union. How do I know that? It says Stalin, and I see the flag of the Soviet Union in the background. Okay, so maybe Stalin's 5-year plans are at work here. So explain the geographic context for the historical development. So something that was occurring on the land that explains what we see here. Okay, so I'll write this down so you can see this. This is kind of confusing. It would be helpful maybe if you saw an answer being written in person here. Right, so here's what I would put. Right, so something about the land, right, that explains why this Iron Curtain was drawn across Europe here. So I will say Russian troops, right? So you should maybe start off with restating some of the question, right? A geographic circumstance that led to the development, or the geographic context that led to development, was that Russian troops occupied land after World War II and turned Eastern European countries into satellite nations in order to form a buffer zone. Yes, stat. You could you could write that, yes. Okay. This is confusing, but we basically want to try your best to connect what's going on the land to the source. Okay, so what's going on the land is that the Eastern European countries, right, those lands are going to become communist lands. And that's basically what you said there. Okay, and the buffer zone idea does tie directly to the land, right? The Soviet Union wanted to put countries between themselves and Western Europe to kind of protect them from Western Europe. Okay, so by creating a buffer zone, by creating a separation on the land and having Soviet troops on the land, all those things help explain this political cartoon. Okay, tricky, very confusing. Next document here, document 2. You've seen this one before as well. Okay, everything I give you guys comes from stuff that was already done. Hopefully, all that experience you've gotten this year will help you rock tomorrow's test. Okay, so this is February 1st, 1992. I was in, what grade was that for me? First grade. Okay, so this is shortly after the fall of the Soviet Union, which fell just less than 2 months prior. U.S. President George Bush, Russian President Boris Yeltsin meet in the U.S. to talk about some things, right? So what do they say? They say that Russia and the U.S. do not regard each other as potential adversaries. An adversary is an enemy. Okay, we're now going to have friendship. We've got a commitment to democracy, to spread democracy. That's a change, right? Because prior to this, the Soviet Union was not democratic. We will work to remove any remnants of Cold War hostility. That's cool. I like that. Promote free trade, so no more Iron Curtain, right? No more secrecy. We're going to now interact with each other. We're going to work together to respect human rights. We're going to prevent the spread of nuclear technology. All right, look at the wording here. Prevent the proliferation, which is a fancy word for spread. Prevent the spread of weapons of mass destruction. Okay, a weapon of mass destruction is one that can do a lot of damage, and usually that's applied to either nuclear weapons or chemical weapons. Okay, so the U.S. and Russia today launch a new era in our relationship, like a relationship that is friendly, not adversarial. Okay, and we're going to work towards enduring peace. Explain the purpose of this joint declaration by the U.S. and Russia. Okay, so like why did they issue this, right? There's a reason why they put this out to the world, right? They could have just hung out and talked in the U.S., but no, they wrote these ideas down and they had them published. Okay, so purpose is author's reason for doing something. We're not looking for opinion here. We're looking for reason. Okay, so for me, I would say the purpose here was to ease people's fears about the tension between the U.S. and the USSR. Okay, actually, I shouldn't say USSR because at this point in history, that country doesn't exist anymore. Now it's just Russia. Okay, ease people's fears, right? So we have to prove that. This can be inferred from the source when it states that, I like this sentence here, that the two countries will, quote, prevent the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. Okay, right? So since they're limiting nuclear technology and saying to the world that they're going to do that, right, that's going to ease people's fears, right? The whole point of, well, not the whole point of, but one of the defining features of the Cold War was this fear that the world could end at any moment because of a nuclear attack. So now that the two countries are going to work to get rid of nuclear weapons and stop their spread, that should make people have less fear and tension. Okay? So I would argue that that's the reason for doing that. It's not the only reason, though, right? They could be writing it to show how the U.S. and Russia are committed to cooperation, to show that the two countries are now going to be friendly. Okay, so there are multiple purposes that you could choose. Just make sure whatever you choose, you back it up with evidence and that you're not writing about point of view, right? You want to phrase it in terms of why they are doing this. Turning point, guys. Turning point is a history-altering event that happens probably in between the two documents, right? Something had to happen, right? If you look at document 1, it shows the Soviet Union able to basically take over Eastern Europe and keep the United States out and keep Britain out, right? A powerful Soviet Union that's industrializing. right? So that represents a country at its peak, I would say. And then you get to number 2 here. There is no more Soviet Union. Now it's just Russia, right? And instead of, combating the democratic countries, they're cooperating with the democratic countries. So something had to happen in the middle that altered the course of history, right? Going from an adversarial relationship to one of cooperation. Something had to happen. So that's the first part of this, is identify an event that led to this shift in history. And there are a lot of things you could say here, right? So I'll give you some ideas, and we'll talk about them a little bit. You could say the fall of the Soviet Union is one of the turning points associated. You could say the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, right? Because without the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, maybe they wouldn't be so weak, right? Maybe it would never have fallen. You could say, the secession of Eastern European countries from the USSR, right? So many countries started to break free from the Soviet Union, which probably weakened them and encouraged them to maybe give it up and start cooperating with the world. You could say the policies of Glasnost and Perestroika as maybe turning points, right? Because these are the reforms that Gorbachev put in place that encouraged people to protest, okay, and that basically got Russia away, or got the Soviet Union away from being communist, okay? So any one of those would work as turning points. So you would simply say, right, one turning point associated with the historical developments is the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, right? That's sentence number 1. Now the second part for a turning point question is easy. You're basically writing about what life was like before the turning point and what life was like after the turning point. That's easy because you have the 2 documents to help you do that, right? So for example, I will say, before, I'll use the invasion of Afghanistan as my turning point. Before the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, okay, so evidence from document 1 to complete my story. I will say the Soviet Union was able to exert its influence over Eastern Europe. Okay, that's what's being shown here, right? They're taking control over half of Europe here. So the Soviet Union, the USSR, was able to force Eastern European countries to become communist since it was a powerful country. Now I have to write about what life was like after the fact, right? Because that's what you have to do to show turning point, both before and after. So, after the invasion of Afghanistan, now we need evidence from document 2. The Soviet Union fell and became Russia, and it now cooperated with the US and helped spread democracy in the world. Right? Before the turning point, they're forcing people to become communist. After the turning point, they're trying to spread democracy. Right? That's certainly a complete 180 there. Right? So identify the event in the middle. That's the hardest part, because that has to come from your brain. Right? Something that is connected, right? Not just some random turning point in history. Something that's connected to those documents, and use 1 and 2 to describe what was life like before and what life was like after the fact. Okay, guys, enduring issues. What I would recommend you guys do, okay, and when you get your Regents, you're not going to have, you'll have room, okay, but you might need to use up a lot of the room, right? And we talked about this in class. I would recommend that you spend some time reading the document, obviously, and take notes, right? Take notes about the main ideas. Take notes about outside information. Like, call the event something specific so you can refer to it later instead of just saying document 1 or document 2. And then brainstorm as many enduring issues as you possibly can that are related to that document. Okay, so when I say main ideas, I do think maybe I should have made this more clear in class. And next year I will subject the kids to a lot more practice when it comes to summarizing something. When I say main ideas, really what I'm talking about, guys, is like who, what, when, where, and why. And the why can come from 2 places, right? The why can come from the document itself, right? Sometimes the document will explain why a particular problem is occurring. But why is also an opportunity to include historical circumstances, right? So sometimes the why kind of bridges a gap between the document and outside information. Okay, the point is you want to remain flexible. Compile as much information as you possibly can, whether it comes from a document or information that you know about that relates to it. Okay, so I won't read the entire document right now, but what I did when I read this, and I would recommend that you do the same. Okay, remember this is August 2019, right? For me, I wrote down who, and I put UN UN General Secretary Ban Ki-moon. Right, because that's who's referred to at the top here. This excerpt is from the UN press release of UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon's message on the International Day for Preventing Exploitation of the Environment in War and Armed Conflict, commemorated on that particular date. Okay, so the where I put it for this, and if you were to read this, you would say the same thing. Areas of the world, you don't need to use full sentences when you take notes. Areas of world in which there is conflict over resources. Okay, that's what's being referred to in this source. Okay, that the main idea here is that violence is occurring over resources in certain parts of the world. Doesn't mention any place in particular, so I just put areas where there's conflict. Okay, not everything is going to be perfect. We're just trying to get a general sense of what's happening here. If you were to read the document, it says that this has been going on since 1990. So I will put since 1990. We've got what, meaning what is happening. Okay, and when you write about the what, you want to focus on, right, describing the document, but also focusing on how people are being affected in that document, right? Because we're looking for problems. Things are problems when people are hurt or affected in some way. The good thing is that they're only giving you documents that describe problems. So if you're summarizing a document, chances are you're going to hit on problematic things that are occurring in that document. Okay, so if you were to read this, I would think here that you would put for what happened, conflict over natural resources, such as timber, which is wood. We've got gas and oil. Okay, so what I do was when I summarize something, I read a couple of sentences at a time, and then I try to write basically one sentence that combines all the other ones into one, right? The big ideas from each sentence combined together. Another paragraph, look at a couple of sentences, combine them into main ideas. Okay, so this sentence I wrote here, the conflict over natural resources, is basically the second paragraph being condensed down, right? I already wrote about the time period, so I don't have to repeat myself. Okay, so then I made one more bullet point that combines all the sentences for the third paragraph. Okay, and if you were to read that, you would probably come to the conclusion that the UN is stepping in to keep the peace in these regions. Okay, that's one of the roles of the UN, right, is to try to keep peace in the world. Well, the UN is stepping in to try to stop the conflict over natural resources. Okay, so how about the why? The why is in this source. Let me just bold these so you can see this better. If you were to look again at this document, you would see that, let's see, where is it here? Sometimes this is in the middle here. Sometimes this is caused by environmental damage and the marginalization of local populations who fail to benefit economically from natural resource exploitation. That's confusing, right? If I were to boil that down, I would say it's being caused by environmental damage. Sometimes it's caused by greed. Okay, keep it as simple as you can, because some of these documents are complicated. It's caused by environmental damage. Caused by environmental damage and greed. All right, so those are my notes for who, what, when, where, and why as they relate to the document. Outside information. Okay, so outside information that could relate to destruction of the environment or conflict over resources, right? You have to keep it connected to the document in some way. And this is super hard, okay? They're not expecting you to have outside information for every single document, okay? But what I would encourage you to do is try to keep your outside information geared towards either historical circumstances or other places that, suffer similar problems, or maybe make some kind of a comparison. Okay, so I think as I show you what I did here, it'll become clear how I'm choosing to incorporate my outside information. So one of the things I'm writing down here is the desertification of the Sahara Desert. Okay, that's in Africa. Okay, so in one of your recent homework assignments, it was described that since the desert is expanding, it's putting pressure on the populations that live on the edge of the desert. And now they're having to migrate and compete for resources with people who are already living far away from the desert. So maybe I choose to write about a specific example of conflict over resources. And maybe I write about desertification. Or maybe I write about the Persian Gulf War. Okay, which also came up in a lesson recently, one of those lessons in which I had you guys complete an Edpuzzle assignment based on one of these super exciting videos. Okay, you learned about this guy Saddam Hussein, who was the leader of Iraq for a long time, and he invaded a country called Kuwait to take over its oil, and that led to a war, right? So it's a specific example of a war since 1990 that was over natural resources. So this would be a good piece of information to help support the claims being made in this source. That would be a really good thing to write about. If you wanted to, you could probably maybe discuss the motivations for imperialism, right? Because imperialism led to European countries coming into contact with other places to get their natural resources, and then sometimes that leads to conflict, right? So maybe Boxer Rebellion could be an example. Right, because the British went to China to get Chinese resources like tea and maybe some spices, and that led to violence. The Boxer Rebellion was an example of conflict. Okay, so let's call this event something. It doesn't have to be perfect, but again, the reason why we do this is that we can use an event title instead of saying as shown in document 1. Okay, which would be, it'll come in handy when we write our thesis statement. So try your best to just call this something. I like to think of it as kind of like summarizing the entire document, including its title, into like 3 or 4 words tops. So I called this UN Peacekeeping Missions. That was the title that I gave this particular event. Now enduring issues, brainstorm, right? You want to brainstorm as many as you can. Because remember guys, after you look at all 5 documents, you got to find one common issue in at least 3 out of the 5. So the more that you list in your brainstorm, the more likely it is that you're going to hit on one that's common in at least 3 out of the 5. All right. So for me, when I read this document, I saw conflict, and don't be afraid to study that list of enduring issues that I gave you guys, because you could there is literally no chance that you won't find at least one of those enduring issues in these documents. Okay, there are many issues in the world, but those ones that I gave you are always on the Regents every single time. So if you have those in the back of your mind going into the Regents, that would be helpful. Okay, so definitely take a look at that list of enduring issues that I've posted many times on Google Classroom. It'll definitely be helpful for you guys. If you can't find that, let me know. Exploitation of resources. Right? Because exploitation means taking advantage of something, right? Taking advantage of resources is causing groups to fight. And that's right. That's the issue part of it. Climate change, right? Because it says the changing of the environment is causing people to have less resources and then now come into contact with others and fight for them. Okay. So these are the 3 enduring issues that I saw in this particular document. All right, so now we're going to repeat that process. I know this is not exciting. We won't do this for all 5, right? We'd be here all day if we did that. But what I want to do is we'll repeat this maybe for document 2, and then we'll just write an introduction and a body paragraph as if we, we're going to write a whole essay, but we'll just do the beginning of an essay. Okay, so document 2. Plus, it's important for me to illustrate to you guys the whole part of identifying a common enduring issue. Muslin was a type of hand-woven cotton fabric fit for emperors produced in Dhaka, a part of India before the arrival of Europeans. Muslin today is a lightweight, inexpensive, machine-made cotton fabric. Okay, so in this particular document, I will read this one because maybe this is good backstory for us, okay? Dhaka's muslin was demolished by colonialism's potent mix of the Industrial Revolution and the Maxim gun. Okay, the Maxim gun, guys, is a rudimentary machine gun. So he's basically making this, the author here in 2016 is making the claim that the Industrial Revolution and the machine gun ruined the Indian muslin manufacturing industry, right? Ruined the Indian cotton industry. So he's going to now talk about that. Europeans came to India at the beginning of the 16th century and were astonished not only at the quality and volume of its cotton textiles, but also by its extensive far-flung trade. Soon Indian cotton textiles were exported more than ever to Europe in exponentially increasing numbers, with Bengal taking the lion's share. Fortunes were made. As the economist K.N. Chowdhury noted, from the earliest times, exports from eastern India were a perennial, meaning endless source of prosperity to merchants of every nation. Right? So initially, in the 16th century, the British went to India seeking cotton textiles. Right? So they went to India and bought those textiles. So that made the Indian businesses a lot of money, because now all of a sudden they're selling their textiles not only to Indian people, but also to British people. Right? So that's like my main summary of paragraph number 1. The British came to India to purchase textiles, which made Indian businesses a lot of money. That basically sums up the entire first paragraph, right? And the when being the 16th century and the where being India. And we'll bullet point that out a little bit later. But muslin's days were numbered. Remember, muslin is that cotton product. The British colonial apparatus, meaning the system of imperialism, whether in the form of the East India Company or as direct rule by the Crown, was a vast extractive machine. Okay, extractive machine means they go there to exploit. They go there to take, not so much to help. So too had been the Mughal state, meaning the government that was in control of India at the time was also kind of did some exploitation. So even the Mughal state, which had herded the weavers into designated workshops to labor in harsh, even punitive conditions, but compared to the pitiless operations of the British, the Mughals were models of mercy, basically claiming that the British treated people even worse than the Mughal Empire did in India. On one side, both company and crown squeezed the farmers and the weavers until nothing was left, then squeezed some more. On the other, a factory-produced, mass-product muslin rolled off the newly invented power looms in Lancashire cotton mills. Okay, so a new type of quote-unquote muslin is now being sold in India that was produced not in India, but in Lancashire. Aided by a raft of tariffs, duties, and taxes, British cotton textiles flooded not only the European markets, but the Indian ones as well, bringing Bengal's handloom cotton industry and muslin to its knees. Okay, so the Industrial Revolution happened, and now all of a sudden the British are like, hey, we're going to make our own muslin, and we're going to pass laws and taxes that prevent the Indians from selling their stuff in Britain anymore. Right? No longer could Indian businesses sell stuff in Britain. From now on, only the British can sell their stuff in India. So since now Indian people aren't able to purchase Indian-made products because those businesses are shut down, the British are still going to make a whole ton of money, but the Indians are not. Okay, so let's do the main ideas. So we've got here who. Okay, so who could be a person, it could be a group of people, it could be a country. So I'm going to put East India Company as a who, Britain, and the Mughal Empire. Okay, because India was controlled by the Mughals at the time. Where, I'll put Indian subcontinent. Okay, that's the region of the world, right? That piece of land underneath the rest of Asia. Subcontinent. We've got, let's see, the when. This is referring, the document is written in 2016, but it's referring to the 16th century and after the Industrial Revolution. Okay, and now the what, the hardest part, right? So this basically sums up the document, right? The stuff that I just talked about. Britain came to India to purchase cotton textiles, and India profited from this trade, right? That one little sentence basically is a combination of all the sentences in paragraph 1. Okay, boiling it down. I know that's a skill that you guys got to get better at. Okay, so now we need another sentence that encapsulates maybe the beginning of the second paragraph. So I'll do Indians forced to work in poor conditions by the British. Just make this a little bit smaller. All right. So that kind of sums up the first half of paragraph 2. And then I'm going to use another sentence to sum up the last half of paragraph 2, right? This idea that British manufactured products are cheaper, right? And they're flooding the Indian market, and the Indian businesses are going out of business as a result because people are just buying the cheap British-made stuff now. Britain started exporting cheap textiles to India and ended the cotton industry or muslin industry. In India. Okay, Britain is benefiting from this arrangement. India is absolutely not. Okay, outside information. Brainstorm what you know about the circumstances for this source, right? Either stuff that happens before or after, right? Maybe things that either demonstrate a continuity over time or a change over time. So here's some of the things that I talked about or I thought of as I was reading the source. I wrote down mercantilism, right? Mercantilism is this trading relationship in which the mother country, right, the European country, they buy cheap resources and sell expensive manufactured products, right? That's the ticket to making money, right? You want to sell more valuable stuff than you buy. Let me rephrase that. That was confusing, right? You want to buy cheap things and sell expensive things. Okay, so that's what they enforced on India here, right? They forced the Indians to sell cheap cotton and then forced the Indians to buy the finished product, right? That's mercantilism. That's what's being talked about in the source here, right? Imperialism again. Maybe that's worth discussing. The Industrial Revolution and how maybe Britain needed cotton for factories. I put Gandhi down here, right? Gandhi helped India become independent. You might ask yourself, well, how does this relate? Well, part of what you need to do in your essay, guys, is try to draw connections to later time periods, right? To kind of touch on, well, is the issue persisting in India to the same extent, or is it less so? And I think you can make a case that this kind of exploitation doesn't exist at the same level anymore. Why? Because Britain is not in control of India anymore, and Gandhi is what helped make that possible. So you'll see a little bit later how I kind of weave this in to the essay body paragraphs. Okay, so name of event, I'm going to call this India's muslin industry. Since I'm kind of referring to it as a title, I'll use all capital letters. Okay, I shouldn't say this because I always want you guys to do the right thing, but on your Regents exam, spelling doesn't matter, capitalization doesn't matter, punctuation doesn't matter. Okay, do those things the best you can, but if you make a mistake, you're not going to be penalized for it. Okay, so that maybe should ease some of your tension and stress. Do use complete sentences though, guys, for the CRQ stuff. Okay, please do that for me. So, enduring issues. I saw exploitation of workers here. Right, because people are being forced to work for the British. It says it here, right? Punitive conditions, harsh conditions. Right? That's exploitation. Exploitation of resources again, right? Because the British are taking advantage of the Indian cotton supply. Impact of trade, right? The fact that India and Britain were connected through trade, and because British goods were cheaper, that caused the Indian businesses to suffer, right? Because India was no longer able to be self-sufficient. Impact of imperialism, right? Without the British imperializing India in the first place, this would not even be possible. I also saw impact of industrialization, because industrialization is what made the British textiles cheap and caused the Indian people to buy the British textiles instead, right? So now the Indian businesses could not compete because it says at the bottom, right, that they were hand loom, right? Hand loom products are more expensive, right? Industrialization made the British goods cheaper, and now Indians are buying British manufactured products. Okay? So if you were to compare now 1 to 2, I see only one source here, or rather one enduring issue that's common. And the common one is exploitation of resources, right? So again, guys, that kind of shows that you got to brainstorm as many as you can. Please promise me you won't write about more than one enduring issue tomorrow. You'll get points off for that. Pick one and write about how that issue is shown in each of the 3 documents you're using, right? I'm only going to do 2 here, okay? But on your essay tomorrow, 3 body paragraphs, 1 for each document. Pick one issue. Tell me how that issue is mentioned or discussed in each of those documents. Okay, so now I'm committing now, right? You will get on the Regents like this little outline page where it says, just to kind of remind you that you have to choose one enduring issue. I'm not going to show you that right now, but if you were to open up the August 2010 Regents and go to where it says page 31 at the bottom, it gives you like a little bit of an outline page where it's, again, kind of reminding you that you got to pick one issue. So we're going to pick, for our intents and purposes, the exploitation of resources as our issue. Okay, and for the sake of time, you guys have been troopers. It's been 2 hours. I'm going to show you what I've written and kind of just take you through what I wrote. I'm not going to type the whole thing out with you guys. All right, so introduction paragraph. You've done this before. So here's what I wrote, right? Start your essay off tomorrow, guys, by defining what enduring issue means. Okay, I'll post this. I'm going to post this whole video on YouTube a little bit later, so you'll be able to go back and look at this. Start your essay off by defining what enduring issue means. Okay, so I define that there. And then I'm identifying what my enduring issue is and what it means. Okay, so I'm choosing exploitation of resources. I'm not saying to the reader, oh, my enduring issue is going to be exploitation of resources. No, right? You want to write this as if you're in college. Exploitation of resources is one example of an enduring issue. And this is when, right, here's where I'm now defining what the issue means. I'm coming up with my own definition, okay? And it doesn't have to be perfect. Try your best. And this is when people, governments, or corporations exhaust the supply of an important material from the earth used to make money through trade or manufacturing. That's how I defined the issue of exploitation of resources. Okay, make sure that's there in your intro. And now, after that, I'm going to mention some of the effects of exploitation, right? And they're not random effects. They are the effects that I see in the documents that I'm analyzing. The effects of exploiting resources has led to numerous effects, such as conflict between groups competing for resources, the collapse of local industries, and the exploitation of workers. Those are the things that I saw in documents 1 and 2. And if I were to continue writing this essay, right, document 3 also shows a worker being exploited. Okay, in this case, a worker from Congo being exploited by the Belgians to get rubber. Okay, so that same effect rings true for all 3 of the documents I would choose to write about for this essay. So the last sentence is where you tell the reader the historical examples you're going to use to prove your point. Those historical examples are the titles that we gave to each of the events, right? So if you guys write tomorrow, this is demonstrated by documents 1, 2, and 3, that's fine. You're not going to get points off for that. But if you can, use the actual name of the event that you came up with. This is demonstrated by many historical examples, including UN peacekeeping missions, which is document 1, India's muslin industry, which is document 2, and Belgian imperialism in Congo as is document 3. So let me just talk you through what I did in the first body paragraph here, and maybe give you some ideas about how to include outside information. Topic sentence, right? One example that demonstrates the enduring issue of exploitation of resources is UN peacekeeping missions. What I like to do at the beginning of the body paragraph is introduce the source. Maybe mention what the title is and who wrote it and when it was written, right? Some of those things that we took notes on in our graphic organizer, right? So here's what I did. I combined basically the where, who, and when. As discussed, given in a speech by this Kai Moon guy, there has been conflict over natural resources such as timber, minerals, oil, and gas since 1990. As a result, the UN has had to engage in peacekeeping missions to stop the conflict. According to Kai Moon, this conflict over resources has been caused by several factors, including environmental damage and greed. So all the stuff I just read to you guys is the main idea notes that we took on the left-hand column. So I now have finished summarizing the document, and what do? I tell the reader where I got the information from. I drop in parentheses doc 1. That's it. That's all I have to do. So now the rest of this body paragraph, there's more here. Notice that, right? The rest of this is going to be explanation and making connections to outside information. Okay? Natural resources often become scarce if the environment is damaged as a result of human activity, right? That's kind of an explanation for the stuff mentioned in the document. So here is outside information. One specific example of this would be the Persian Gulf War, which took place in 1990. Okay, so again, the document mentioned how there's been conflict since 1990. Well, here's a specific example of that from class that's not mentioned in the document. So I'm throwing that in there. In this conflict, Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait in an attempt to seize oil. In response, an international force invaded the region to drive him out. Okay, so there's one example of a conflict driven by exploiting resources. So I'm dropping in there. Stat, yes. Right? Yes, it's a great question. Okay, so sometimes the why, right? Sometimes the why is not going to be in the is not going to be in the source, right? In this particular document, it tells you why there's conflict as a result of exploitation, but it might not be there. So for you, when you do the why, if it's not there, that's your opportunity to include historical circumstances. Okay, so in this case, it's given to me, so I don't have to worry about it. But if you can explain the why with your outside knowledge, that's a great way to include outside information. All right, so take a look at what I did here. The exploitation of resources around the world has been occurring for quite some time prior to these UN peacekeeping missions. Okay, when I use that transitional phrase prior to, I'm indicating the reader that I'm now doing backstory. I'm now doing historical circumstances, right? And if you guys take a look at the broad picture here, if I'm writing about what's going on now, and I'm writing about the same thing occurring in the past, that demonstrates continuity over time, right? That helps me demonstrate that it is, in fact, an enduring problem. Prior to the peacekeeping missions, European countries such as Britain and France sought to gain colonies for natural resources. Okay, for example, Britain colonized North America to gain cotton and tobacco. This exploitation of resources fueled conflicts, such as colonists eventually launching a revolution and declaring independence from British rule. Therefore, the current conflicts raging in the world as a result of exploitation of resources proves that this is an enduring issue, right? It went on in multiple places over a long period of time. It's still going on, okay? So again, take notice of this, guys, right? The summary of the document is short. You want to be spending your time in your paragraphs explaining things, making connections to outside information, right? This is, again, I'm showing you what would get a score of 100, but this is the ideal. This is what you should be aiming for. You should not be spending body paragraphs just quoting documents. That tells the reader that you're just fishing for content. Include details when you can, right? But this should be you should be doing more paraphrasing of documents. You should be doing more explaining, more connection making. Okay, I will read the second one because we're having a grand old time, right? Because you're not gonna get another history lesson from me ever again, most likely, right? Let's just let's do it for the nostalgia's sake. So, another topic sentence. Now introducing the second document. Another historical example that demonstrates the exploitation of the exploitation of resources is an enduring issue. The grammar there got messed up, sorry. Another historical example that demonstrates the exploitation of resources is India's muslin industry. Sorry about that. Okay, so instead of saying document 2, I called it India's muslin industry. If you just say document 2, you're not going to get penalized for that. I'm just showing you again how to make it the best essay it could be. Again, when you can, introduce the name of the document, where it was published, who wrote it, and when, if you can. I could, because that information was given to me here. In a document called Our Story of Dhaka Muslin, okay, which is, again, what is printed underneath the source for document 2, which was published by Aramco World in May/June of 2016. Again, I just took that from here. Hopefully you guys can see that. The author discusses how the British came to India in the 16th century in order to purchase and profit from Indian cotton textiles. Okay, so notice what I'm doing here, right? I'm spending the paragraph summarizing the document. The document shows that people were affected by this trade in a number of ways. For example, the British forced the Indian people to work in poor conditions. Okay, so that's all I wrote for my document summary there. I just took the notes that I made on the bottom and put them into a summary. Okay, there is one more part though, right? The fact that the industry collapsed, I'm saving that for a little bit later as like an example of how people are affected. Okay, but the point is, guys, keep your documents kind of short. This relationship grew even worse for the Indian people later in history. Okay, this is still part of my document summary. I apologize. After the Industrial Revolution, British industries were looking to export their manufactured products to new markets. As a result, British cotton textiles made their way to India, and the Indian muslin industry collapsed, putting many people out of work. Okay, so technically, what I could have done, it's not a big deal. I could put this down here, right? Because technically, my document summary ended there, right? I mentioned what's going on, and I mentioned how people are being impacted. Okay? While other parts of the world still experience exploitation of resources, it has been reduced in India as a result of the work of Mohandas Gandhi, who used civil disobedience in order to obtain independence for the Indian people. Okay, so remember, guys, what I said is that when you can, you might not be able to do it in every paragraph, but when you can, try to make some kind of connection to today, right? And make a claim of whether the issue is still the same in that part of the world or maybe it's different. Okay, in that part of the world. It's different in India now because India is not being controlled by the British anymore, right? India is independent. India manufactures its own stuff again. Okay, and that's all thanks to Gandhi, right? So that's just a way for me to kind of build Gandhi into my paragraph as a means of explaining that the enduring issue is changing a little bit. Yes, it still might be a problem in other parts of the world, but not so much in India anymore. Okay, it doesn't have to be a problem everywhere in the world. All right, so again, summarize your documents, try to bring in outside information to explain why things are happening, try to use outside information to give supporting examples to stuff already mentioned in the documents, try to give outside information to explain how the issue persists or maybe how the issue is changing a little bit in that particular part of the world being referred to in the document. Okay, if you guys do this process for one more document, and a conclusion paragraph is nothing, like 2 sentences. You're basically just summarizing your introduction, right? You're kind of restating your argument, right? Tell me again what issue you wrote about and how people are affected by it, right? So basically, you take this part of your introduction and make it your conclusion. Maybe change the wording up a little bit, right? They're not going to care so much about a conclusion as long as your body paragraphs are really awesome. Conclusion doesn't matter. I've literally seen, guys, I've been on these committees, right? There are times where I'm out of class to attend workshops. I saw the other day in this grading workshop, this particular Regents exam, and they showed me what a perfect score was. And the perfect score essay had no conclusion whatsoever. And it still got 100. Why? The body paragraphs had so much information, a conclusion wasn't even necessary. So if you find yourself like at the Regents, like you're worried about time, and you're like you're like planning in your head to save time for a conclusion, don't. Okay? Use your time, all of it, for body paragraphs. And if you don't get to a conclusion, don't even sweat it. Because like I said, literally, this is not fake news. Literally, I've seen essays get 100 on the Regents that have no conclusion.